Hi everyone. In this video I want to share an article on my website which is the most popular article by far, so it must be resonating with people a lot, that people have this similar feeling, similar idea that this is what's happening for them on some level. So the article is called NPD Emotional Munchausen by Proxy, and it compares the condition Munchausen's by proxy with what happens in a narcissistic household. So let's go and have a look at that article on my website. My website is called childrenofnarcissists.org.uk. Let's go and have a look. So what is Munchausen Syndrome by proxy? MSBP is defined as a mental health problem in which a caregiver makes up or causes an illness or injury in a person under his or her care, such as a child, an elderly adult, or a person who has a disability. The aim of the person with MSBP appears to be to obtain attention, sympathy, and in some cases money. A parent with MSBP can cause their children to come physically close to death or to actually die. So for me, I think that narcissistic personality disorder is comparable because they cause such psychological injury to their children that it's debilitating for them in many, many ways. So how is a parent with MSBP similar to a parent with NPD? Narcissistic personality disorder can be likened to Munchausen syndrome by proxy, but with the difference that people with MSBP cause physical illness in others and people with NPD cause mental illness in others. The similarity is in the intentional harming of a vulnerable other to meet their own needs. So this is what's happening in a household with a narcissistic parent. A parent with NPD will cause incredible mental stress in their children, which can lead to the creation of personality disorders, addiction, suicidal ideation, panic disorders, depression, anxiety, and complex PTSD, among other conditions. The behaviours of parents with NPD can cause their children to feel suicidal, to attempt suicide, or to commit a slow suicide in terms of self-destructive behaviours like drug and alcohol addictions. So many people can maybe spend their life drinking, and then this can lead to an early death, which we could class as a slow suicide. So something that perhaps wouldn't have happened if they hadn't have gone through what they went through as a child. Of course, it's impossible to say. Perhaps it would have happened anyway, and that person was born with that predisposition to that happening. But we can certainly see that an addiction is a common outcome of growing up in a narcissistic household. Children from parents with MSBP are also left with these psychological consequences in adulthood, as well as a lot of physical damage if they survive. So children from parents with MSBP, those parents are also likely to be cluster B personality disorders. So we're looking at histrionic, borderline, narcissistic, and antisocial personality disorder. Psychopathy is a subset of antisocial personality disorder, but you're looking at that kind of personality that are going to not have the restraints on themselves that people without those personality disorders might have. So especially when they can disconnect from their empathy. So people with narcissism, for example, and antisocial personality disorder, they can disconnect from that empathy. And this means then that they have no restraints in what they will do to someone in order to obtain the attention, the money, the sympathy from other people. And certainly with narcissists, there's that feeling of entitlement that they can do what they want. And also that need for narcissistic supply, which could be seen as an addiction that they need to feed off to sustain this image of that grandiose self, this false image. Common behaviours. A parent with MSBP will gain attention from their child's physical illness, and a parent with NPD will use the stressed, traumatized behaviours of their child against their child, and will often tell other people in the family or outside of the family that their child has mental health problems whilst feigning sympathy or empathy for that child. So they would say something like, oh, poor Brian, he's got mental health issues, there's something wrong with him. And this is a smear campaign mixed in with drawing attention and sympathy from other people for the position that parent finds themselves in. Parents with NPD will often play their child's problems for sympathy and portray themselves as the hapless victims of circumstance when they are largely, if not solely, responsible for their child's mental ill health, or rather, we could call it their child's behavioural adaptations to their living circumstances. So they're not mentally ill, they have psychological consequences of living with an abusive parent, and they also have their defences that they're developing which are adapting them to the living circumstances they're in for best survival, to minimise the impact of the abuse and all the madness that's happening around them. There is victimisation of all of their children at different times, but most specifically and consistently of their scapegoat children. These are the children onto whom they project all their negative feelings and choose to blame for everything that they feel is wrong, as people with NPD avoid taking personal responsibility for anything. The scapegoat child may be the child who suffers most obviously. There is a lot of psychological pressure for the children of MSBP and NPD parents to buy into their parents' version of reality. The version of reality provided for them is ever changing from moment to moment, which makes actual reality something intangible and difficult to make sense of. If a child does not buy into their MSBP or NPD parents' version of reality, there are serious consequences. So here we have that it's my way or the highway, which the child knows is really serious. The reality that underlies that, what might look superficially, it's my way or the highway, the child actually knows that there can be abandonment if they don't go along with their parents' version of reality and go along with what the parent wants. People with MSBP and NPD lie and exaggerate, are very manipulative and are emotionally unstable. And a child of someone with MSBP has to or does believe that they are ill physically, and a scapegoat child of someone with NPD will often believe that they are crazy, mentally unstable, and that there is something wrong with them. They will often repeatedly be told this by their parent. So they'll be told this by their parent, and they'll also be made to believe this implicitly. And they often have feelings of, if I was different, everything would be fine. If I was different, my parent would love me. It's a hideous place to be, because part of the self-blaming is also so that you can keep attaching to that abusive parent. So if I blame myself, I don't have to hold you responsible. We can both live in the delusion that the problem is me, and then I can still get some kind of acceptance on some level. Even as a scapegoat child, there'll be attempts to do this. There'll be resignation to it being impossible on some level, which is where there can be lots of hopeless feelings, helpless feelings, feelings of powerlessness. They're going to take the blame. They're going to feel that they're to blame for the situation in the family, the dynamic in the family. Both disorders have a sadistic, masochistic aspect. Munchausen Syndrome and NPD. So according to the NHS, which is the National Health Service of England, UK website, Munchausen Syndrome, which is causing illness to oneself, can be seen in the following 3 cluster B personality disorders. Different personality disorders thought to be linked with Munchausen syndrome include antisocial personality disorder, where a person may take pleasure in manipulating and deceiving doctors, giving them a sense of power and control. Borderline personality disorder, where a person struggles to control their feelings and often swings between positive and negative views of others. And narcissistic personality disorder, where a person often swings between seeing themselves as special and feeling that they're worthless. It could be that the person has an unstable sense of their own identity and also has difficulty forming meaningful relationships with others. Playing the sick role allows them to adopt an identity that brings support and acceptance from others with it. So it's really interesting that comes from the UK's NHS website about Munchausen's. Childhood roots. Munchausen's syndrome by proxy and Munchausen syndrome is thought to have its roots in childhood abuse and trauma. There are many theories of how NPD is caused. I have an article on some different doctors and psychiatrists' theories of the roots of Narcissistic Personality Disorder. I'll put a link to that in the description of the video. In my personal view of how Narcissistic Personality Disorder is formed, I would see it as a dissociative disorder, and people with NPD are born with certain inherent characteristics as well. So you have a darker soul, a person who it goes into more of a fight response as a default rather than a submissive response. So a person that's challenging others and is more aggressive than someone that chooses other responses. So they're born with certain inherent characteristics. They have some kind of trauma. They often have their own parent who has NPD. There can be some kind of intergenerational trauma there. There can be some kind of tragedy that happens early in life in the first couple of years. But at root, it's not having their real self, their authentic self, supported and nurtured. So something has happened where the mind has been affected to such an extent that they're becoming a false self, which involves this grandiose image of themselves, which they have to believe in, everyone else around them has to believe in, and they go into rages if they're challenged by anyone on that. Which could be as well why scapegoat children are in for it more than the other children, because scapegoat children tend to not be so believing of what's happening. They seem to be a bit more aware that there's something very wrong. They're not so deep into that family dynamic and that delusion that people have to live in, the lie that people have to live in when they're living in a narcissistic family. That's my personal view. So, a horrible video, really unpleasant. But yeah, unfortunately, this is the reality that we're living in when we come from a narcissistic family, is that these kind of things are happening and it's awful for the children. So yeah, I hope this information, this video is useful for you in some way in coming to understand better what's happened for you if you come from a narcissistic family. And thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves and bye.